We're very grateful to Gary Clark for presenting today's showroom, CAR Showroom. Gary is an architect. He was trained at Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen. And then in 1992-93, he took the MPhil Environmental Design course at the Martin Centre here in Cambridge. He was taught by Kun Steemers, former director of CAR, and Dean Hawkes, who gave an excellent CAR showroom in January this year. And for his dissertation on passive heating and ventilation, he worked with Nick Baker and Kun Steemers, also former directors of CAR. So having got a very good grounding in the principles of sustainable design, Gary has worked primarily in practice, trying to apply these ideas. And he's now at the global practice of HOK, based in their London studio. And he specializes in science and technology buildings, including the new Centre for Advanced Research Centre, University of Glasgow, and now under construction to be finished next year, major project. As well as working on science and technology buildings, Gary acts as the sustainability lead across all sectors in HOK. And beyond HOK, he's very active in the profession, supporting these ideas. He's chair of the RABA's Sustainable Futures group. He was the author of the RABA Sustainable Outcomes Guide 2019, and he's a professor at Queen's University, Belfast. So he's very active in trying to connect research and practice, which of course is something, an ambition very much shared with CAR. In the nearly 30 years since Gary came to the Martin Centre, there's been tremendous progress in the dissemination and adoption of sustainable ideas. A long way still to go, of course, but tremendous progress. And to a large degree, that progress is due to the tremendous efforts of key individuals like Gary, who pursued this agenda tirelessly. It's what Gary calls his golden thread. And we're looking forward to hearing about it. Gary, please tell us about your golden thread.
Thanks very much, William, and thanks, Hannah and Natcha as well for the invite. Really pleased to be with you all. Right, I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get going. So, just making sure that's fine. So is that all okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Fantastic. Right, so really just kicking off, it's I called it the golden thread, maybe a grand title, but effectively that's one of the books I really kind of read in depth and wrote an essay on, and part of my MPhil was a golden thread, Ken Butty's book about passive solar design and the history of it. And really combine that with Rainer Banham's book, the two really sort of set the context of how we've sort of a few thousand years of building, how are we doing, and really taking those principles through into my everyday practice and obviously research as well. And then that sets the context of where we are now in terms of we've got a climate emergency. So I think it's linked, but as William was saying, it's a fantastic grounding at the MPhil, and I've tried to build on that work as you'll see over the last 30 years. 30 years have gone quite quickly, and I think it's the main thing to say is it's been quite patchy. It's been very difficult to achieve this golden thread consistently because we're a team. It's a team sport in terms of architecture. We've got to make sure that the client's on board. We've got to convince our engineers. We've got to convince skeptical project managers, cost consultants, you name it. So trying to really create this golden thread or achieve it is extraordinarily difficult, and really that's why I've kind of naturally gone into, and I think it's this kind of thing where a reasonable person adapts, an unreasonable person tries to change the context. So what I've been trying to do with my policy work is change the context of how buildings are procured and how as a profession we really sort of deal with sustainable design. So I'll share some of that work. So just going through very quickly. So I'm just taking a little bit of time to switch on here. Hold on a sec. Here we go. Right. So just taking back. So if there's anybody back in the the MPhil Martin Centre back in '92, you might recognise some of this stuff. So it's I think the grounding really came from this. It's three things. One is the is this kind of real focus on actual building performance. And this is, you'll see the data there. That was kind of in use data. I monitored a building in sort of Cambridge, a research building. And it ran through the temperature. You can see the temperature curves at the top there. It carried out a kind of occupant survey as well at the time, and then modelled that building. And you can see right in the centre there, and it was a whole SALT modelling side to things. So again, CFD was probably 30 years ago was quite difficult for some complex visualization. So again, I was attracted to SALT modeling, and then worked with the physics and engineering department, and then set up a small lab in the basement of the Martin Centre back in the old days. So again, this thing about really understanding how a building works, plus modeling, and then taking that into this integrated passive design. You can see that was my kind of thesis project for the MPhil there. So that's the grinding, and really try to take that into my my teaching. So again, I went didn't go straight back into practice. I went I taught back at my old university at Robert Gordon's, and then went to Edinburgh University for a few years as well. So I had about 7 years in academia, which was actually quite lovely. So in terms of my my approach to students was really really teaching them the golden thread and the history in terms of Rba Climate history of design in the machine age. It really was that, is reconnecting our students with actually the fundamentals of building. And one is this kind of shelter, thousands of years of environmental determinism, which actually creates the forms, distinct forms of our buildings and materials, local at hand, and in everything. So again, the expression perhaps of a culture comes from the way we build, and so this is really what I'm trying to engender all my students over the last 30 years. Then picking up sort of comfort, so going up the kind of Maslow's hierarchy, and really picking up sort of our kind of Georgian heritage. This is kind of building in Edinburgh, and really sort of the whole thing which I've been trying to say to my students is maybe not so much passive solar, but it's passive daylight. So for me, sustainability and environmental design starts with actually creating daylight, again, getting that balance of daylight right. And then the form of the building really comes from that balance. And you can see there, the Georgians, obviously, the kind of the detail and the love of which they create the windows, and we see the quality of light within that space still to this day. So it's really reconnecting, making sure that students understand that really what's a window's actual use. It isn't just an architectural aesthetic form. It is something that is useful and actually is pragmatic, and there's got to be some science behind that as well. And then through into delight, and this is Louis Kahn's Kaufman House, and for me this all comes into the designing from the inside out. It's about that, creating these lovely moments of space to enjoy. In terms of health and well-being agenda is very big now, but for me this image kind of sums up exactly everything about the light, this connection to nature, the materiality, everything in there. And obviously you've got a nice controlled ventilation device right next to your window as well. And then all that kind of knowledge really is highlighting, and people recognize this in terms of Rba Climate, is this kind of building is a key moment. And it's still surprising when I show this slide how actually even sort of many sort of my colleagues in terms of architects the same generation as myself, really this is a forgotten story, which is quite extraordinary. So obviously we've got Corbusier's kind of 1929 building, and one of the first uses of air conditioning in Paris, which then allowed the international style, in this case just curtain walling, new materials, to really have this very thin facade. And then the story, obviously, as I'm sure you're all aware, is in 1952, they asked Corbusier to come back to do a sustainable retrofit of the building because they couldn't afford the kind of energy use of air conditioning the building, and obviously air conditioning wasn't as robust as it is today, so it was kept breaking down, so forth. So there's a lovely story there with Corbusier coming back to do this passive retrofit, and really this is where we're at now. I mean, I think we're at the same point. We've got to think about passive retrofit. And the quite sad story is, and this is 1952, have we learned our lessons as a profession? I would argue not, because this is a view of London as, in the last kind of couple of years. And it's a celebration of, we can see the Shard there, the celebration of crystalline architecture from early Mies, the facade, and then it's kind of seal buildings, relying on machines. And I think this is part of the problem. And this is why, obviously, we've got our cities and our built environment is providing 40% of the CO2 emissions of the planet, and that's creating part of the problem of climate emergency. So we've got to act, and we've got to act fast. As part of that, my sort of story, as well as kind of teaching for a few years, I did some research. So I was working with Fergus Nichol and Dr. Humphreys in Oxford Brookes, and we did a post-occupancy evaluation of about 8 buildings throughout the UK, and that was the field studies I did, which then went into CIBSE's adaptive comfort algorithm. So that's part of that research. That was really good fun. At the same time, I came back to the Martin Centre, and obviously with Nick Baker, Kuhn, and obviously with Brian Ford as well, with Nottingham, we were doing early salt modelling. You see there, this is the Sydney Olympic Stadium. And then more latterly, I had a couple of years at Heriot-Watt University, and working with Professor Sue Roth there. And our idea was to create a net zero eco-village, which then provided a test bed for new technologies. And this was actually mooted, you see here, 2011, and we did early analysis, and from that, the theory was it could be net zero. And then really it's a case of, if this was built, this would provide the test bed to test all the behavioral and the controls mechanisms of all the techniques that we're doing now. Unfortunately, what happened is the bonfire of the codes when the Conservatives got into power, all the net zero, we've wasted 10 years effectively. All that bonfire stopped all this kind of research. And I think we're only starting now in terms of the rush to heat pumps. So there's a big there, but we were all ready to do that 10 years ago. So moving back to practice, I hit 30 years old, and my students in Edinburgh were coming back working on fantastic buildings with fantastic architects, and I still never managed to finish my PhD. So at that point, I said, right, that's it. I'm going back to practice. So that's me. So I joined Hopkins Architects, and very much kind of sort of a like-minded practice, very much kind of sort of the kind of passive design principles really embedded into the way they designed. And obviously at that point, Bill Dunster was there, and so we overlapped for a couple of years, and we had some great fun. And again, Bill was instrumental in terms of a lot of the architecture at that point in terms of sustainability. Portcullis House, and you will see Nottingham University there. So when I joined, really it's a case of really taking the theory that I was teaching in terms of sustainable design and development, and then really kind of trying to map that out onto a process map. And then this is where I took the triple bottom line and looked at the kind of virtuous cycles within each of these elements in terms of ecology, water, land use, materials, energy, and fiscal cycle. And just to kind of give an idea, a really grounding to the practice of actually how all these issues are interlinked, and then how we can actually help, not only from an energy point of view, but this is a whole holistic point of view as well. So, this is kind of interesting diagram, this one. Anyway, at the same time, around about the early 2000s, or sorry, middle 2000s, this was, I got invited to chair this is the kind of BISRIA soft landing user group. And this is Bill Bordas, Rod Bunn, Adrian Lehman was there as well. So really it was picking up all the kind of research that they'd done, and really the whole thing here is, and this is another golden thread, and Bill Bordas talks about this quite a lot, is actually about this kind of building performance, and how soft landings really is mapping over the entire design process, right from the beginning, right the way through the process. You can see there, these are just kind of key issues there in terms of what you do. But the whole thing here is creating the building, or thinking about the building in use and the outcomes of the building, rather than the more traditional architectural planner work and the design point of view. So this was a fantastic few years. Working with Rob Bunn, and lots of kind of sort of guidance notes there that we kind of sort of developed together. So that was the theory. And then taking up to the policy work, and as I was saying, it really, the frustration of practice over the years, really, I think that the frustration there was that you had to kind of get in there and actually trying to change the way that we kind of sort of approach in the procurement process. And really, I got invited onto the Rba Sustainable Futures Group, and obviously I've been the chair for the last 3 years. My term is ending at the end of December, and really it was good. It was a good group, and the Rba very kind of supportive. But it all changed in 2019, and there was a lot of pressure put on the Rba at that point. I think the architects had declared the climate emergency, and really the pressure was on the Rba to kind of step up and really change and really quicken up the pace of what we've been saying for many years in the Sustainable Futures Group. And this has led to this kind of declaration, which I think was a game changer. So it's June 2019, and behind the scenes, it took a lot of work to get this done. And then the work I've been doing the last few years is helping craft these guidance notes here, and really hopefully it creates a sound platform and a foundation for sustainable guidance for the Rba to come forward. So I'm going to touch on the Rba Climate Challenge, sustainable outcomes, as William mentioned. All that's kind of leading into the new plan of work that was released in 2020, and there's a new guide for a plan of use as well, which I'm going to touch on. So very briefly, all these guides are linked back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, all 17. And but then if you've dipped in behind the front pages of the 17, I think it quickly goes to 100 KPIs and then 300 metrics behind that. So the question was really, it's all great in terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, really kind of big supporter, but how does a busy professional deal with this at a practical level on a project when the speed is so quick? We're talking 3 months for a concept, even shorter sometimes, and the process really is very quick. So I picked up the work that Rab Bennett had done back in 2005 with Egan, and he'd developed with a group a set of KPIs. So really the whole idea is to match the two together, saying what's the minimum amount of outcomes and metrics that defines a holistic sustainability of a building. And so that hence is the Rba Sustainable Outcomes. So that's the 8 outcomes at the side there. And then what we did is these 8 outcomes. So it's outcome driven. You'll see the terminology really kind of comes from the soft landings approach as well. It's less about design. Design is the process of how do you get an outcome, but it's defining those outcomes. So again, we've got net zero carbon emissions in terms of operation. We've got net zero embodied carbon, and together that's a whole life. But I'm very keen that those are seen distinctly. We've got sustainable water cycle, we've got sustainable conductivity of transport, sustainable land use and ecology, good health and well-being, sustainable communities and social value, which is a really big topic just now, and then actually adding sustainable life cycle cost in as well. And if you go back to my diagram from Hopkins, you'll see that the roots of that thinking were very much embedded back then. And from this, this is actually where the work has been done in terms of, there was a group, the Sustainable Futures Group was about a dozen people, and we factored in, I think we sort of liaised with about 50 people in the profession back in 2019, and we came up with these kind of key metrics. So it's about 20 to 30 metrics, which we think a project could and should sort of track and manage throughout the life of the process of the design, and can actually sort of verify those kind of sort of metrics in use as well. And so that's the basic thing. But really the way this sustainable outcomes is driven is it's really, these are the core, but it's allowing the project and the team and the client to choose what metrics they would like to do in terms of what to track throughout the process. So this is how it's embedded into the 2020 plan of work. is, and it's all written from this point of view, is really you've got the outcomes at the side there, and really stages 0 and 1 are setting those goals with your client. So very much upfront, and then using stretched and realistic benchmarks. So again, benchmarks are absolutely important, real world benchmarks, not theoretical. And then how stages 2 and 3 is obviously developing that, integrating that into a design concept and through into developed design. And then when you're going into technical design, obviously you're going into the detail where it's a more monitoring and reviewing process, handing over to the contractor as well in stage 5. And then a key moment, and this is where we've done a lot of work, convincing the RBA, ARB as well as SIBSI, where it's really sort of trying to get alignment. At the end of stage 5, so stage 6 is this kind of moment of handover and closeout. So that's where practical completion effectively is the end of stage 5. And then we move into the kind of defects period, the 12 months. And that's at that point is we've got to hand over the building to the users. And we've got to kind of learn as well in terms of how the building is bedding in. And that early stage light touch POE really is conducted at the end of 12 months. So we've got that written into the new plan of work. Now, just to highlight, this is the great thing is that the RBA, I've convinced them that they should make this mandatory for all chartered architects and practices moving forward. So that is the plan from the RBA. The ARB has also kind of supported that as well. And SIBSI are very supportive as well. So hopefully that's all going to come to pass. But at the moment, we're creating a training pack for the profession. And obviously, once that's trained up in terms of next year, then hopefully at the end of next year, we can mandate that. And finally, stage 7 is about that dissemination, about the post-occupancy evaluation, and then feeding that all back in terms of back into the beginning of the process of your next job. So that feedback loop is actually sort of fundamental to the RBA plan of work. And this is something I do in-house. So this isn't in the external guidance. This is what I do to my internal teams, is spelling out really what that means, what's the kind of key things that teams need to do at different points. So you see, set your outcomes at the beginning, green design principles there. These are all the kind of key principles that each team really needs to kind of hone on and make sure that's all sort of optimized within the early stages of design. Going into the fine detail, and this is where obviously passive house approach comes in well in terms of making sure that the external envelope of the building is really well detailed, and mechanical systems are fully integrated, local controls as well as renewables and so forth. And then finally, this handover, where it really is picking up the principles of soft landings and plan for use to make sure all that's embedded. And it's a relay race to make sure the users understand how the building has been designed. And vice versa, we're learning from them as well. The plan for use, this was the kind of final guide of this one, this suite, and this is effectively the architect's version of soft landings. And I love the term when we kind of derived it. We're talking about a plan of work for 50, 60 years, but we've never talked about the use of the building very upfront. So again, this is where this is rebalanced. It's a plan for use, thinking about the users in mind and then the outcomes in mind at the beginning of the process. It's then championing a graduated post-occupancy evaluation strategy. So it's a light touch review within that first year, but it's not sort of intensive. It's just trying to find, how the building is bedding in. But really kicking off in year 2 is a bit more a diagnostic assessment using, we can see here TM22 or bus surveys or whatever tools are kind of sort of the client or the team would like to use. And then if there's any issues, then obviously that you go into detailed forensic investigation in year 3 if there's any sort of things to sort out. So that's kind of the principles, and then hopefully that's all going to be hopefully mandated at the end of next year. But fingers crossed on that. The other one is the 2030 challenge, which you may have heard about. And this one is setting, so we set the guidance, we set the principles in terms of sustainable outcomes. Now we've got to set a timeline. And really, this is where the work that we did, a couple of years ago with other bodies like LETI and SIBSI and everybody else, really this next 10 years is absolutely critical. 2030 if you look at just the way that we're designing. And obviously some people with terms architects declare, and other bodies, they really think it's now, and I don't disagree. But what we're trying to do here is a balanced approach, saying that actually we need to lift the entire profession, and we can't really do all that now. We've got to allow people a cycle, an iteration, where they try and hit the net zero, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, as we talked about. So that's why we've given the 2030 as that target, given everybody 10 years, and really, hopefully, we're saying to government as well, that should be the government's target as well. You know, all new and deep retrofit buildings should be net zero by that time, and if not earlier, as we can see this one. So anyway, that's the map of where we're trying to go. And then as part of that, we've set particular targets. Now, I'm not going to go through all this data, but effectively what we're saying is we take our current benchmarks, and then we set a percentage reduction on that. So for operational energy, it's about 75% reduction from you know, current long-term benchmarks. And for embodied carbon, it's a 50% reduction. And then water, it's a 40% reduction. So that's the combination of all those things. That's setting the target, and that's really put the challenge down for lots of people here. So can we do it? Well, I think that I'm quite happy to present lots of other architects' work, and this is a really cracking one. I'm sure you know this building quite close to Cambridge, Archetypes Enterprise Centre. And then this has achieved a 70% reduction. I'm really sorry, but I think there's a fire alarm that has just gone off. So I can't believe this, but I've got to vacate the building. So I'm really sorry, Hannah.